And repeat after me. I take refuge in the Buddha.
I take refuge in the Buddha.
I take refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
Keeping the palms joined. Put the palms down. All right, good morning, everybody. Nice to see you all. Thank you for showing up. Anyone here for the first time? What brings you here?
I was invited by some friends.
I'm glad you said that, because I'll be nicer than normal. Last time they brought some friends, it was like, I'm usually, actually that's a lie.
You don't have to be nice.
I don't have to be, well, there we go. Perfect. I like you already. Yeah. No, it's a funny thing. Well, I'm glad you're here. Before I go into that, anyone else here for the first time? Now that we got that out of the way. Usually the first timers are all the way in the back, so that way you can sneak out, nobody knows. What brings you here? I kind of figured as much, yeah. Dangerous question, but since I know Corey a little bit, what did your nephew Corey say to you to get you here? Were there lunch promises involved, or?
He said I'd get free stuff.
You'd get free stuff? I said I was a little afraid to ask that question. Yes, well, I will see what over the next hour we can leave you with as, like a parting gift, right? When you go to a game show and you don't win, but you get a parting gift? Yeah. So we will ponder the parting gifts. Welcome. Anybody else first time? But yeah, back to kind of what I was going to say earlier, because I think it's important. When especially for new people, when you come to Buddhist practice or meditation or any kind of spiritual place, you often think like it's going to be this calming, peaceful thing, and everyone's going to be, all loving, and it's going to give you a hug, and you're going to feel so wonderful leaving. And I just never seen Buddhism that way. I see it as something that very much Manjushri is a bodhisattva. Bodhisattva means enlightened being, but the second tanka there on the wall is Manjushri, and he holds a sword. And the sword is considered the sword of wisdom. And what the sword does is it cuts through the ignorance, the anger, the greed, any sort of things in our mind, these defilements as a reference in Buddhism, anything that causes our suffering, right? All of that can be shattered. And so, yes, there are some approaches that say, well, let's just, let's be gentle with ourselves, and let's hug ourselves, and let's, tell ourselves we're good enough, we're smart enough, and gosh darn it, we like ourselves, for those who know Stuart Smalley. But for me, Buddhist practice hasn't been that. And I can only share from my personal experience. For me, Buddhist practice, I had enough of that my whole life. And that wasn't what worked for me. What worked for me was that very kind of fierce, tough sort of wisdom that helped me shatter all this crap that was in my head. I'd spent enough years of people telling me, oh, you're wonderful, and this is great, and here's a hug, and you'll be okay. And that, that didn't fix my anger and sadness and depression, right? That just made me wallow in it more because everyone's telling me I'm okay, and I'm like, nah, I'm really not okay. And so for me, my introduction and approach to Buddhism just randomly happened to be more of a practice that was like that sort of wisdom that just cut through the anger and the ignorance. And so very often when I, lead, and I really appreciate you, I forget how you even said it, but something to the effect of you don't have to be nice, or you're not that nice, or basically the approval you gave me to be okay not being nice, however that happened, that was great, because I do concern myself with people who are brand new. Those of you who've been around a while, you'll see the ups and downs of styles and approaches. But brand new people like this for many people, very often that come here, most people, it's their very first introduction to Buddhism and meditation. And very often the last thing they're expecting is this really harsh approach. But sometimes for me, I think that's what's needed. That's what was needed in my life. And I don't always share that way, but I often feel that that's what many people need, but we're just not necessarily what? Ready to hear it. And so when we get that kind of harsh approach initially, if you're brand new, it can be a little jarring. Like, I thought I was going to some peaceful Buddhist place, and this dude just told me what it, I'll leave it there. But, so yeah. As the Buddha said, there's 84,000 paths to awakening, 84,000 paths to suffering less. And for each individual to explore, what does that path look like in your life? And sometimes we need the gentle hugs and that you're going to be okay and positive affirmations. And sometimes, maybe we need that little bit of harshness in our lives that says, okay, let's be honest with ourselves and explore, why are we really suffering? Why are we really in pain? And if we can use this kind of sword of wisdom to cut through some of that, then maybe the gentle hugs that we are so desperately seeking and craving and desiring are not necessary as often, because overall we're just in a more pleasant, joyful space and less needy of that kind of holding on to. So we'll start with the meditation practice. For those who are joining virtually, glad you're here. Thank you for showing up. Feel free to say hello. There's a chat box on your screen somewhere. A couple things I'll tell you before we begin. For those who might be new or never sat here before, nothing's going to happen to you. You're not going to float away. You're not going to have any mystical, magical experiences. The mind that races all day long is not going to shut off. Don't judge your practice, meaning don't ask yourself, is this working or not working? Are you doing it right or wrong? We're just going to sit and breathe. Your mind will continue to race. It won't go blank. You're not going to think nothing. As your mind races, I'll say things periodically to remind you that you're lost in thought or just guide you back to the present moment. Posture, you just want to be comfortable. If you are on a cushion, often it helps slide in the front third, pushing the stomach forward, allows the back to straighten, shoulders are relaxed. Hands can be on the knees or lap, whatever's comfortable. I'll guide us as we begin, and then we'll settle into a little bit of silence. Starting with the eyes closed if comfortable, or slightly open. Mouth is open or closed, whatever's comfortable. We'll start with taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. Eventually, settle into a natural rhythm of the breath. Noticing the mind as it wanders, jumping from thought to thought. Start with gently guiding the attention, focus, to the stomach or chest. Breathing in, feel them rise. breathing out, they fall. Simply continue this practice, observing sensation of breath, expecting nothing but to sit and breathe. As the mind wanders, lost in thought, recognize it. Release that thought. Return attention, focus to the breath. Breathing in, follow breath in. Breathing out, follow breath out. Letting go of expectations. Letting go of judgments from your practice. Just sitting. Breathing. Learning to be comfortable in stillness, in quiet, wanting nothing but to sit and breathe. And with the body still, rested, and the speech quiet, aware of all sounds, and the mind learning to settle, know what it's like to just sit and breathe. Knowing with each breath, there's nothing else to do. Nowhere else to go. And no one else to be. Everything beautiful, exactly as it is. sitting, breathing. Once again, taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. As you slowly open the eyes, slowly beginning to move. Most important, with the practice of meditation, as often people think it is. It is direct perception into the present moment. And the present moment is often filled with conflict, chaos, difficulty, challenges. And this practice is learning to be with life as it arises. Very often when we have conflict, chaos, difficulty, challenges, we want to run away from one thing or towards another. Craving and aversion, as the Buddha taught. Craving to run towards something and running away from what we have an aversion to. But the practice is to deeply look at what is it that is behind the cravings and the aversions and begin to understand that. And if we can begin to understand that, then there's less of a need to constantly run, which is how many people spend much of their lives without even realizing it. Always looking for the next place, the next thing, the next person, the next whatever it is. Often thinking that something or someone or somewhere else is better than where you are. And that it's not easy to look at always. But it's really an important piece of this practice. Meditation is free. Buddhist practice is free. It's just sitting, breathing, learning to become aware of what you think, what you say, and what you do in each moment. Because that creates your reality. Once we stop trying to change, fix, control, manipulate everything outside of us, and we work on changing our mind and our reaction to the world around us, life gets simpler. But it does take practice. So with that, I'll pause. For me, I always really just prefer to respond to questions, meditation, Buddhist practice, anything you're sitting with. And we'll use the rest of our brief time for questions. That was quick. Go ahead.
I have a question about impermanence.
Yeah.
Since everything changes, it makes sense to practice like non-attachment in my day-to-day life. But how do I avoid going from attachment to indifference? Like I care too much, I don't care at all. Everything's going to change anyway, so why?
Yeah. No, great question. But that is using a very I'll just say it's using an incorrect understanding of non-attachment.
Okay.
Because what you said was, how do you go from caring to indifferent?
Not to avoid that, because I tend to go, if I care too much and then say, well, then it's too much, and then...
I understand. What I'm saying is you're defining non-attachment as not caring. And that's not what non-attachment is.
So how do you get non-attachment?
Well, hang on. You're already worrying about how to get there without even understanding what it is. How can you, if you want to go to Poway, how can you got to know what it is and where you're going before you even get in the car. Right? So, non-attachment is love. You realize that? That would be a no. Based on your question, that's where your lack of understanding around non-attachment is. Because the way you phrased that question was almost as if non-attachment means you don't care about things anymore and you're indifferent. I'm using your words.
Yeah.
You said indifferent.
Yeah.
And non-attachment is not indifferent. Non-attachment is not caring. Non-attachment is absolute, endless, ultimate love for everything and everyone. That's what non-attachment is. Can we love everything and everyone without expectation? Without wanting them to do what we want? Without asking them to be different? Can we just love people and places and things for how they are? Doesn't mean you have to agree with it. Doesn't mean it has to resonate with you. Doesn't mean it has to be how or where or who you want to live your life with. But love is not control. Love is not manipulation. Love is not making sure that everything goes well. Ultimate love is appreciating and loving people for who they are and how they are, regardless of what they think, as well as places and things. But very often with non-attachment, where people struggle the most, it's around people. And love and non-attachment are the same thing. Non-attachment is love. Love is non-attachment. It is loving without any expectation for them to be any way at all. And if they choose to be this way, then that's their choice. If they choose to be that way, then that's their choice. Non-attachment doesn't mean that you're avoiding a situation. Non-attachment means you're throwing yourself into it and loving it for how it is. And if this person chooses to go that way, that's their choice. Attachment is manipulation and control. Non-attachment is freedom from that. So there's no range there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you sit with that for a few weeks and begin to explore that will, you'll still have questions, don't get me wrong, as we all do. But that will help you begin to see what is actual non-attachment and love, and what is me just avoiding things. Because in your question is also the idea of avoidance,
Yes.
and also the idea of running from one thing and running to another thing. But first is understanding that has nothing to do with attachment or non-attachment. That has to do with your sense of self and your ego and your desire to want people and places and things to do everything you want them to. Anyone here not want people to do things what they want? You wake up today and you're just like, I don't really care what people do today, I'm good. And to be able to do that, to have that attitude, to have that approach, to have that mindset, and not be in this passive avoidance place. Again, bringing the reference of Thich Nhat Hanh's Engaged Buddhism. Engaged Buddhism is the most non-attached, loving thing that you can do. It is to engage in the world, to fight for what you believe in, to fight to create change, but to do it without attaching to the outcome and without attaching to your view that you are better than the other person. Yeah.
I think it helped me a little bit to understand the difference between empathy and compassion. Because when we run around feeling like we have a lot of empathy and love for things, it's only because we're having a shared emotional experience or a shared perceptual experience. The compassion part's hard because you have to be this way even when you don't share those feelings.
Yes.
And that's hard.
Yes. Yes.
But that's the only way that I could get back to even beginning to understand non-attachment, because you have to go with loving kindness,
Right.
regardless of whether you share feelings or outlooks or behaviors or
Yes.
worldviews or any of that stuff. And that's really can be tough.
It is. Yeah, absolutely.
What's the next step after you accept them and love them? does Buddhism say anything about them? You love them, so because you love them, you need to let them go.
Yeah, so the question, to throw it back, what's the next step after accepting them? And I want to come back to that word, and loving them. What's the next step in, if you love them, you have to let them go? Is that that's your question, right? So the first part, and again, it is just semantics, so please add to this, but just for the sake of all of us, for me, when we say I accept them, what that means is very often we still think what about them? They're wrong. So I want to start there. You're wrong, but I'm going to accept you and love you. It begins there with us saying, okay, in my judgmental mind, in my dualistic mind, I am saying that I don't like what you do, I don't care for what you do, but I'll accept it. But the only reason that I don't like it and I don't care for it is because I think you're wrong. So at the root of that question, which is a beautiful question, similar before we even get to what's the next step, at the root of that question is, how do we continue to cultivate these deep seeds of absolute love and compassion, which is what your question is about, without thinking that they're wrong?
I just need a different word, so...
Yeah, no, great.
All right, forget the acceptance part, so kind of think of a different word.
Yeah.
So you love them, and you also need to love yourself. And so in loving yourself, the most loving thing you can do is to let them go.
Yes. And your question is, how do you do that?
Or if Buddhism says anything.
Forget about what Buddhism says. Your question is, how does one do that, right? Man, I wish I could be the wise Korean Zen master. Many of you have seen him over the years. He's been here a couple times. But the very first time that he was here, someone asked that question. Similar, in essence, the same question, but just in a different way. I don't even remember how it was asked, but it was the same idea. And he asked, there was somebody sitting up here, it might have even been the person asking the question, I don't really remember, but, and he asked if they had like a wallet or something on them, and they pulled out this kind of wallet card thing. And he said, can you hand it to me? They wouldn't even let go of it. And when he finally got them to let go of it, he said, it's the same thing. In letting people go, you just let them go. It's not that complicated. It's complicated in our heads and in our hearts because we have a lot of attachments. We have a lot of clinging. We have a lot of stories. We have a lot of history. We have a lot of hope. We have a lot of dreams. We're saying, I love them. I'm going to let them, if you love someone, set them free. Right? These are just words, but to set them free means free from any bondage you have over them whatsoever. The answer is, it's really simple. You just set them free. That doesn't mean you're good, but let me add to that. That doesn't mean you're going to feel good about it. That doesn't mean you're going to be happy about it. It was almost like, and I can't believe I'm even bringing this up, but I think you were here. It was almost like Tuesday night when the person was asking about, I was saying everything is beautiful, and they were saying, their question was around how can betrayal, who was here too? They said betrayal. They said, how can betrayal be beautiful? And, with all the love and compassion and pain I was feeling from this individual, I said, betrayal is beautiful because the person chose what they wanted to do. So at least you know. Doesn't mean you like it. Just like letting people go. Doesn't mean you like it. Do we let them go and really let them go? It's like playing your last round of roulette and walking away from the table and not looking back. Don't look back to see what number comes up next. You just move on. Not easy. And if you figure out how to do it, let me know.
I guess I'm also kind of caught up in the semantics of that because I wonder if we're talking more about just letting people be. Because if they go, that's their choice.
Sure.
Just because you let someone be, it doesn't mean they're going to go.
No, semantics, of course, and I think it really just depends on the situation. The way this question was asked, what I heard wasn't let them be, what I heard was let them go. I could be wrong, but that's what I was hearing. Again, using my words and what go and be mean.
Maybe I don't understand what that means, or like what you meant by let them go.
So they're not in my life anymore.
Yeah, that's what I...
Wanting them to go.
It's the most loving thing for us to do with that part. Yes.
And that's what I heard and what I felt, and that was my response to that. Letting people be is very different, but also applicable to a same situation. We have to, I believe, let people be who and how they are as the process of letting people go. And it's really the same thing, I think, if we apply, and this is why I think it's so hard for many of us to do this, is it's also practice to have that, because what this is love and compassion. Non-attachment, love and compassion. And what that also requires is to have that non-attached love and compassion for yourself. We have a hard time just letting ourselves be, letting ourselves go, meaning letting yourself go to who and however you are, because we're afraid, potentially. We're afraid to just be ourselves. And there's so many layers of critique and judgment and criticism towards ourselves. Then how do we even begin to ponder what it's like to do that for somebody else when we're still trapped? We're still stuck. We're not free. But somehow we're trying to muster up the courage and strength to allow others be so they can then be free. This is not easy stuff to do. But it does come back to constantly watering and cultivating the seeds of compassion that says, for me, compassion starts with gratitude. Being grateful for everything and everyone that's in your life and every experience that you've ever had, no matter how painful it was, to have allowed yourself to come to this place. Other thoughts, questions? Yeah.
Yeah. You talked in the past about Thich Nhat Hanh's there are no false views. And I had an experience yesterday in dealing with a person who was living on the streets. And I went away, I did something else, and I came back, and the person was a man, he was still on the streets, and he was yelling and screaming, and he was angry, and there was nobody there. And it's a kind of situation, I don't know how to make a question out of it, it's a kind of situation where we used to say he's possessed by demons. I mean, and it might have to do with drugs or alcohol or who knows what's altered his brain, okay? But where does that concept of demons, does it fit into Buddhism?
Yeah. So the question around, you seeing someone on the streets and they were in really just an unhealthy state of mind, whether it was drugs or alcohol or, some sort of cognitive, mental disorder. The question is around, for those who didn't hear it, that as you said, you used to say that people were possessed by demons. So in Buddhism, where does that concept of demons come into play? In the story of the Buddha's awakening, at the end, after sitting for 21 days, the whole process is he's being challenged by Mara. And in the story, Mara begins to challenge him with fear and lust and doubt and all these things. And he overcomes all of them. And at the end, Mara says, "Who bears witness to you defeating me?" And he simply touches the earth. Again, this is a story, but he touches the earth to show that the earth was his witness. The earth trembled and shook, because, what's a good story without the earth trembling and shaking? The earth trembled and shook, and Mara went away. Well, you know who Mara is in the story? It's his mind. So, regardless of the words, whether we use demons or, obviously different religious views will have different words, different languages, different words. But in Buddhism, ultimately, all suffering comes from one place and one place only, and that is the mind. Now, that's not to say that there can't be and that there isn't, because there is a lot of mental disorders going on, the addictions, how that alters the brain. There's a lot of just mental, emotional, chemical stuff happening there as well. So it's one thing to say, well, it's just their own mind, which it is, but it is also, in many cases, as many of us in this room have experienced, a mind that is really altered and has been traumatized drastically from so many heavy experiences. So to say just blanketly, well, it's the mind and you can heal that, it's a lot more challenging than it sounds. But it's not as if, in Buddhist practice, from my experience and knowledge, it's not as if that it's something else, to use your word, demons or possessed, that has entered you. It's just a different state of mind. They talk about nirvana, being free from suffering, and samsara being this, cycle of just kind of existence and hell that we're often in. And even in the hell realms with Buddhism, where they talk about the different realms that, if you come at it from a concept of rebirth, which they all believed in at the time of the Buddha, for me, when I was first taught about the different realms of existence, to me, they were all just states of mind. You ever wake up one day and you're happy and peaceful, and then 5 minutes later, not so much anymore, and then 3 hours later, happy and peaceful, and then 5 minutes later, not so much anymore. You get my joke about how long it takes to, stick in our misery. So to me, in that moment, we've gone from a happy, heavenly place in our hearts and minds to just feeling like we're living in hell, and then everywhere in between. Yeah.
Hi. I'm always asking the same question about engaged Buddhism, and I think my question is, so we're starting from a place of love. We're starting with love, always. And you've talked a lot about how a problem with attachment is that we think the other person is wrong. We think the other viewpoint is wrong, because there are a million viewpoints, right? But ours is right. So what would Thich Nhat Hanh say about being in engaged Buddhism, starting with love, not thinking any viewpoint is wrong, but resisting? How do you not think that something is wrong, a viewpoint is wrong, and then resist it?
When you say resist, can you expand on that a little bit? What do you mean when you say how? Yeah.
We'll say
without specifics and details.
I'm sorry?
Go ahead.
No.
I won't cut you off yet. Generally,
because I am talking generally.
Yeah.
I'm talking about, say, he's from Vietnam. He was from Vietnam, yes. So, a repressive regime, for example. So presumably, Thich Nhat Hanh would say, well, we resist the repressive regime, but we do it with love. But obviously, resistance also implies the regime is wrong.
So you answered the question.
Great.
You just can't do it yet. You can't do it. I'm not saying I can do it, nor anyone else in this room can do it, but you answered the question. Your question, there is no question. At one, first and foremost, obviously, which you've heard me say this before, but anytime a question says, like, what would Thich Nhat Hanh say, what would the Buddhists say, I'm just Jeff, I don't know what the hell they would, what would Jeff say? What unenlightened, ignorant thing can I add to the mess? What I would say is that, yes, and to back up for those who don't know, Thich Nhat Hanh, I kind of touched on it briefly based on the question, but really, well known for engaged Buddhism. As I always say, his work with Martin Luther King and walking hand in hand and fighting against, racial inequality and social justice issues. And I often say, every racist, every sexist, every homophobic person, I want them here sitting in this room and listening to the Dharma. And I want to love them no differently than the people that don't have their views. And I want to sit with them and hold them and hug them and understand where's their pain, where's their suffering, where's their hurt. Why do they want to, in their minds, do what they want to do? And can I do that without judging them? Right? I mean, as all of us in this room do. I have so many friends that I grew up in a very privileged, upper class, white, Jewish neighborhood. And so many of them are filled with views that I don't personally have. Now, I can hate them. I can unfriend them. Right? I can block them because I don't want to hear them. And what good is that doing? Nothing. It's just further creating a division and a little bubble that I'm going to live in and only surround myself by the people that I'm okay with, right? And so for me, when I look at Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings, someone even said this, was it Thursday night or Saturday? Someone just said something recently that I had not read or come across where Thich Nhat Hanh referenced, do you know what it is, David?
No, I'm thinking something else.
The loving the enemy part?
It wasn't Thich Nhat Hanh, it was the Dalai Lama, and I said it. It said, my enemy is my friend.
There you go. My enemy is my friend, the Dalai Lama. Yeah. So I don't know what Thich Nhat Hanh would say, but that's what Dalai Lama would say. And he's also a pretty good source. So your question really is in understanding that, like intellectually we can understand that. The question and the issue for most of us is our heart's not able to do that yet. Because we can't. And the teaching that's being referenced, for those who haven't heard it, Thich Nhat Hanh said, and to me, as I always say, it's one of the best things I ever heard. If you go to YouTube, you put in what is Nirvana, Thich Nhat Hanh, there's this, like, I think it's 7 minutes and 42 second teaching where he talks about nirvana, which is freedom from suffering, is freedom from views. And what he goes on to say is all views are wrong. And the way I interpret that is not that the views we have are necessarily going to go away, nor do I think my views, some of them are ever going to change. There are certain things that I'm never going to think are okay. And I'm not, as a practitioner, I'm not sitting here thinking that, I'm just going to abandon all my views. There are views that will never change. 100%, I'm pretty certain that these views will never change, some of them. But is there any room for me to listen to anybody else's views? That's what I got from that teaching, is that this is my view and I believe it's correct. And the Buddha himself, as I often say, the dude was an activist. The guy spent 45 years roaming around telling people to practice love and kindness and compassion. I don't know what's more activist than that. The guy was a rebel. He turned his back on so many of the views of society in India at that time. You know who were not equal in India at that time, nor today around most, if not all of the world? You know what was not allowed and what were not equal in India at that time? Women. I mean, not women were allowed in India. What I mean is, women were not allowed to become nuns. They were not allowed to ordain. Because there was no equality there. And I'm no scholar historian on this, so I may say things a little bit off. But one of the women, and it was I believe it was his mother, or his aunt actually, who raised him. His mother died 7 days after he was born, but his aunt who raised him, like his mother, wanted to ordain and wanted to become a nun. And the Buddha initially said no. It was a boys' club, men only. And then one of the Buddhist disciples went to him and said, do women not have the same ability to awaken as men do? And the Buddha said yes. And that created the opening for women to become nuns. At that time, there wouldn't have been the reference of this is not how things should be because that's how things were. And then he saw this is not okay. Right? Now there's no equality, today, all over the world, still. That's just one example of, to me, where I think the Buddha was absolutely an activist and rebelling against many views in society. And that's inspiring to me. Right?
So just for reference, he was referring to the Chinese government when he made that statement. The enemy was the Chinese government, but it was also his friend.
Yeah. Thank you. So, not easy to do, as you preface, I always ask the same thing. Good. Keep asking the same thing. Because this is not, it's not something you're going to hear and by like the end of April be like, okay, cool, I got it. No, you'll be working on this the rest of your life, as will all of us. And, as my master always said, don't look for answers with your questions, change your question. Meaning, let's continue to cultivate it's like shaving away a little bit of what's blocking us from embodying that way. Not easy stuff. And I think it is important to ask ourselves and not to like hate yourself or think you're like a bad Buddhist, right? Most of us, if not all of us, are not in a place where we can do what the Dalai Lama is talking about. And you're not like failing at Buddhism if you can't love your enemy. But at least be honest with the fact of where you're at. And see if you wish to, how you can cut through some of that. Or you can continue to hate people your whole life. Yeah.
Is there a thing of love in terms of non-attachment and non-judgment?
Google, and I say this seriously, instead of like saying here's a book, but you could literally just Google love in Buddhism. You could even go into YouTube. Probably technology at the root. I still think of the opposite of love. It has a lot to do with heavily and say, well, I love you, and that's why I want you to do everything I want because it's what's best for you. And so, and very often. Things like that, you look at family members, loved ones who are struggling and suffering. So you also want to be careful there, not thinking that loving them regardless of how they choose to act.
Buddha said there's 84,000
paths.
Isn't all the arms of Lava?
Yeah, whatever rebirth in his teachings. That's your 1,000. One of the first things that Avalokiteshvara in all directions. So, yeah. All right, so with that, we'll join directions. May all beings be at peace and free from suffering. May any merit gained be transferred to peace. May we all be at peace. All right, a few quick announcements to introduce Buddhist practice to those who show up. Those of we're just practitioners. We do our best to take our understanding. Different practices going on, different half day of silence, so hours. It's not fun of it also, but again, that's the first.